Dense fog enveloped the hills of Nemea, and the air carried the weight of a dark omen. Hercules, standing on the edge of a dark cave, sensed the presence of the creature before he even saw it. The Lion of Nemea, a beast that no man had been able to slay, lurked in the shadows, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. The hero moved with the dexterity of someone who had faced death countless times. Every step calculated, every breath measured. He knew that his ordinary weapons would have no effect against the monster, whose skins were impenetrable. However, he felt no fear. On the contrary, there was a cold calm in his movements, as if he had already accepted that only brute force and cunning could save him. The lion stepped out of the shadows with a roar that shook the bowels of the earth, its muscles rippling beneath its golden hide. Hercules planted his feet on the ground and watched the creature advance, each step making the earth tremble. He drew his bow and fired an arrow with the precision of a hunter, but the arrow shattered against the beast's flank as if it had hit stone. Without hesitation, Hercules threw aside his bow and advanced to hand-to-hand combat. The lion leapt at him, its claws tearing through the air towards the hero's throat. But Hercules, quick as lightning, sidestepped and grabbed the beast by the thick mane, pulling it towards him with all his might. They fought body against body, in a confrontation that seemed to last an eternity. The lion's roars were drowned out by the sound of Hercules' fists meeting flesh. The hero felt the creature's claws scratch his skin, but he held on tight, not allowing the pain to overwhelm him. With a cry of supreme effort, Hercules used all his strength to squeeze the lion's neck until the beast stopped struggling, its life slowly ebbing away. When Hercules' heavy breathing finally calmed down, he was covered in sweat and blood, but the victory was his. He stared at the lion's lifeless body and, with a decisive gesture, began to remove the creature's skin. It was an arduous task, but Hercules worked tirelessly, his calloused fingers unwrapping the lion's skin, which he knew would be his armor against the dangers to come. He looked towards the horizon, where the hills of Nemea now seemed calmer, as if the weight of the beast had been removed not only from the land, but also from the hearts of its inhabitants. Hercules, wrapped in the lion's skin, left the place with firm steps, his mind already set on the next task that awaited him. He knew that the road to redemption would be a long one, but with each battle won, he came a little closer to his ultimate goal. Crossing the Lernaean swamp, Hercules could smell the putrid odor of stagnant water and decaying vegetation. The atmosphere around him was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the earth itself was trying to push him away. But the hero was undeterred. He knew that there, in the dark depths of the swamp, the Lernaean Hydra awaited, a creature whose name was whispered in fear by mortals. The swamp was too still, and Hercules, on the alert, moved cautiously. Then a colossal shadow emerged from the water, rising like a hellish serpent. The Hydra had a serpentine body, covered in black scales that reflected the moonlight. Its heads, 7 in all, moved independently, like snakes in search of prey. The sinister gleam in the creature's eyes revealed an evil intelligence, a will to destroy. Hercules wasted no time. He knew that hesitation would be his undoing. He drew his sword, the steel gleaming as he launched himself at the creature. With one powerful blow, he severed one of the Hydra's heads. But before he could move away, he watched in horror as the severed head split into 2 new heads that grew in place of the old one with supernatural speed. Despair tried to take hold of Hercules, but he didn't allow doubt to creep into his heart. He knew he needed a new strategy, something beyond mere brute force. It was then that he remembered the advice of his wise nephew, Iolaus, who had suggested cauterizing the wounds to prevent the heads from regenerating. As the Hydra advanced with its new heads, Hercules called for Iolaus, who was waiting on the banks of the swamp. The young hero brought a flaming torch, and together the two of them began to fight the Hydra in a different way. With each sword stroke that severed a head, Iolaus was there, quickly cauterizing the creature's neck, burning away the flesh before new heads could grow. The fight was fierce and relentless, each movement coordinated between the two heroes like a deadly dance. The Hydra attacked with fury, but Hercules and Iolaus continued to resist, fighting as if their lives depended on it. Hera, furious at seeing her plan threatened, sent a gigantic crab from the swamp to attack Hercules from behind. But Hercules, with his enormous strength, crushed the creature with a single blow, his determination unshakable. Finally, only the Hydra's immortal head remained. Hercules knew that this head could not be destroyed in the conventional way, so he ripped it off with a Herculean effort and buried it under a large stone, so that it could never do any harm again. The Lernaean swamp was silent again, but this time the silence was one of relief. The Hydra was defeated. Hercules, his arms sore and his body covered in wounds, looked up at the night sky. The starlight seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the gods were acknowledging the heroic deed that had just taken place. He knew that, despite his victory, his journey was far from over. More challenges awaited him, each more difficult than the last. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, taking a deep breath of the night air, knowing that he had taken another step towards the redemption he so desperately sought. Hercules crossed the mountains and valleys with the perseverance of a man determined to overcome any obstacle, no matter how great. This time, his mission took him to the vast forests and plains of Greece, where the Corsican of Cyrenea roamed free. It was no ordinary creature. It was sacred to the goddess Artemis, with bronze hooves and gold horns that glistened in the sun like a divine promise. Capturing the live Corsa was a delicate task, requiring more than strength. It required patience and respect for the domains of the gods. For months, Hercules followed the raven's tracks, watching it from a distance, trying to understand its pattern of movement. Each morning, he woke up before dawn, walking through the dew-covered woods, waiting for the right moment to act. But the doe was as fast as the wind, disappearing between the trees before he could get close. Hercules began to admire the creature, its ethereal beauty and unparalleled grace. He realized that the brute force he had used against the lion of Nemea and the Hydra of Lerna would not help him here. Capturing the Corsican required cunning, a game of patience where every move had to be precisely calculated. Finally, after almost a year of relentless pursuit, the moment had arrived. The Corsican, exhausted from her long run, stopped at the edge of a calm river. Hercules, with light, controlled steps, approached, his muscles tense like those of an archer about to fire. He launched himself at the creature with surprising speed, grabbing it without causing damage. His firm fingers gripped the golden horns as the Corsican struggled, but Hercules was gentle, whispering soft words to calm it down. As Hercules prepared to take the Corsican back to Mycenae, the woods around him began to darken, as if a shadow had fallen over the world. He looked up and saw the imposing figure of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, emerging from the shadows of the trees. Her eyes glowed with a restrained anger, and her bow was ready, the arrow aimed straight at Hercules' chest. "How dare you touch my sacred creature, son of Zeus?" The goddess's voice was like distant thunder, reverberating through the woods. Hercules, aware of the danger, maintained his position without letting go of the Corsican, but also without showing hostility. He explained his mission, the burden of the tasks imposed on him by Eurystheus, and the burning desire for atonement that guided him. Artemis watched him in silence for a long time, her piercing eyes searching for any sign of dishonesty. But she found only sincerity in Hercules' eyes. The goddess lowered her bow, but didn't put it away. "Take the Corsican to the king. Show him that you've captured her. But she is mine, and you will return her to my domain." Hercules nodded respectfully. He knew he owed the goddess a debt and didn't intend to abuse her mercy. When he reached Mycenae, he showed the Corsican to Eurystheus, who, as usual, didn't dare approach. Then, with the same delicacy with which he had captured it, Hercules released the Corsican, which quickly fled, disappearing into the depths of the woods, returning to the kingdom of Artemis. Once again, Hercules had completed his task, but the price was the constant reminder that his path was filled with beings and forces far beyond his comprehension. The redemption he sought was not just a question of strength. It was also one of understanding and respect for the delicate balance between men and gods. The mountains of Erymanthus stood like implacable guardians of the horizon, their snow-covered slopes sparkling in the sunlight. Hercules advanced, his gaze fixed and determined, while the biting wind blew against his face. He knew that the task ahead of him was no less dangerous than the previous ones. The boar of Erymanthus, a creature feared by all, was wreaking havoc in the region, destroying crops and terrorizing entire villages. On his way to the beast's lair, Hercules stopped briefly at the dwelling of Pholus, a wise and kind centaur who welcomed him with hospitality. Pholus, with his mixture of curiosity and respect, offered him a simple but welcoming banquet. During the meal, Pholo brought out a jug of wine, reserved for special occasions, but which aroused the ire of the other centaurs who lived nearby. Hercules, unaware of the local traditions, accepted the offer, and the aroma of the wine spread through the air, attracting the furious centaurs. A fight broke out, angry centaurs appearing on all sides, clamoring for the return of the wine which, according to tradition, could only be opened with everyone's consent. Hercules, taken by surprise, found himself engaged in a savage battle against the half-human, half-horse creatures. He fought deftly, using his enormous strength to defend himself. But in the chaos of the battle, Pholus, trying to help, ended up being mortally wounded by one of the arrows poisoned with the Hydra's blood. Grief fell over Hercules like a dark cloud. He deeply regretted Pholus' death, feeling the weight of his responsibility, even if it was unintentional. But despite his grief, he knew he couldn't deviate from his mission. With a heavy heart, he laid Pholus' body to rest and headed for the mountains, where the boar was waiting for him. When he finally encountered the Erymanthus boar, the beast was even more terrifying than the rumors said. Its eyes glowed with a savage fury, and its curved tusks glistened like swords ready to kill. The monster advanced with astonishing speed, shaking the ground with every step, but Hercules was prepared. Using his strength and agility, he cornered the creature, driving it into a snow-covered gorge. The battle was brutal and intense. The boar, in its desperation, charged at Hercules several times, each time more savagely, but the hero held his ground, dodging with precision until the right moment. Finally, with a single blow, Hercules managed to subdue the beast, tying it firmly. The boar, exhausted and unable to resist, became submissive to Hercules' relentless strength. Hercules dragged the creature back to Mycenae, his muscles tense from the effort, but his determination unwavering. When they reached the city gates, Eurystheus, terrified by the sight of the captured boar, hid in a large bronze jar, ordering Hercules to get rid of the beast as quickly as possible. Although the task was complete, the price Hercules had paid was high. Pholus' death weighed heavily on his conscience, reminding him of the unintended consequences of his actions. Even so, he knew he couldn't stop. His journey was far from over, and the next challenges awaited him with the same relentless intensity that he had faced so far. Each step taken brought him closer to redemption, but it also brought new lessons and regrets, reinforcing the complexity of his destiny and the need to continue. The banks of the river Alpheus glistened in the setting sun, and the fragrance of wild flowers filled the air. But the natural beauty of the place did nothing to ease Hercules' anxiety. He knew that the task ahead of him was unlike any other. It wasn't a question of facing a ferocious monster or capturing a mythological creature, but of carrying out a seemingly mundane task: cleaning the Augean stables. However, the simplicity was illusory, as those stables hadn't been cleaned for 30 years and housed an uncountable number of cattle belonging to Augeas, king of Ellida. Hercules arrived in Augea's kingdom and made his proposal. Confident in his ability, he offered to clean the stables in a single day, but on one condition. In exchange for his work, Augeas had to give him a tenth of his herd. Augeas, disbelieving that such a feat was possible, accepted the bet with a mocking smile, certain that he would be victorious and at no cost. The task seemed impossible, and Augeas' workers laughed behind his back, convinced that the hero had finally met a challenge that would defeat him. However, Hercules was no fool. He walked along the banks of the rivers Alpheus and Peneus, observing the constant flow of their crystal-clear waters. A brilliant idea popped into his head, and he decided to use nature itself to do the job that seemed unattainable by brute force. Hercules began his work with a series of precise blows, diverting the course of the rivers so that their waters flowed directly through the stables. The force of the current swept away everything in its path, taking with it years of accumulated dirt and debris. The process, which could have taken weeks or months, was completed in a matter of hours. When the sun began to set, the stables were clean, sparkling, as if they had never housed a single animal. Augeas, on seeing the result, was impressed, but his pride and greed quickly took over. He refused to fulfill his part of the agreement, denying that the task had been carried out by Hercules alone, and claiming that the help of the rivers made the agreement null and void. Hercules, enraged by the injustice, took the dispute to court, but Augeas, influential and powerful in his own land, manipulated the trial, getting Hercules disqualified. Hercules left Ellida with a bitter taste of betrayal in his mouth. It wasn't just the loss of the flock that bothered him, but the principle, the fact that even in his extraordinary achievements, heroism and honor could be obscured by corruption and greed. For Eurystheus, the king of Mycenae, the task didn't count as accomplished since, according to him, Hercules did it for personal gain. But deep down, Hercules knew that he had done what no one else could do, and that was enough for himself. He had used not only his strength, but also his intelligence, showing that true heroism lies not only in the muscles, but also in the mind and in the ability to overcome adversity in unexpected ways. The journey was far from over, and each task taught him something new about the world, about men, and about himself. And so he prepared himself for the next challenge, knowing that the obstacles ahead would be even greater, but that he was just as determined to overcome them. The cold winds of Lake Stymphalus blew between the skeletal trees, carrying with them a high-pitched sound that made even the brave hesitate. The lake, dark and mysterious, was home to the dreaded stymphалid birds, creatures that fed on human flesh and whose bronze claws and beaks were deadly weapons. Eurystheus, in his quest to test Hercules' limits, had given him the task of exterminating these birds that terrorized the surrounding villages. Hercules arrived at the lake prepared for yet another battle, but he soon realized that this challenge would require more than physical strength. The birds, numerous and flying in circles above the dark waters, were fast and unpredictable. Every attempt to hit them with arrows failed, as the projectiles deflected off their metal armor. The hero watched the creatures' movements carefully, trying to understand how he could deal with them. The challenge was great, and for the first time, he felt that he was facing an enemy that could not simply be defeated by force. It was then that Athena, goddess of wisdom and war strategies, descended upon him in her resplendent form, carrying a pair of bronze castanets forged by Hephaestus himself. She handed the castanets to Hercules, instructing him to use them to create a sound that would disturb the birds, causing them to leave their formation in the sky and land, making them vulnerable. With a gesture of gratitude and respect, Hercules picked up the castanets and headed for the lake. He positioned himself in a nearby clearing and began to beat the castanets, creating a shrill sound that reverberated through the mountains and echoed across the lake. The noise was so loud and penetrating that the birds, confused and terrified, began to scatter in all directions. Chaos took over the sky, and the birds, unable to resist the deafening sound, descended to the ground in disarray. Hercules acted quickly, firing his poisoned arrows, which now, with the birds on the ground, found their targets with precision. One by one, the creatures fell, their metal claws and beaks becoming useless in the dirt. Those that managed to escape Hercules' fury fled far away, leaving Lake Stymphalus and never returning. When the last sound of the castanets faded, the lake was silent, a heavy silence, but this time without the weight of fear that had gripped the area for so long. The terrifying birds had been defeated, and the lake, once a place of death and despair, finally seemed to be able to rest. Hercules, tired but satisfied with his victory, returned to Mycenae. He knew that he had won not just through strength, but through cunning, through his ability to adapt to new and challenging situations. When Eurystheus received the news of Hercules' success, he didn't hide his surprise, but as always, he disguised the respect that was beginning to grow for his cousin in the midst of harsh orders and new tasks. The hero, for his part, didn't let himself be put down by Eurystheus' indifferent reactions. He had learned yet another valuable lesson, that the power of the gods could be in a simple object, like the bronze castanets, and that victory sometimes came from an unexpected approach. But he knew that the tasks that remained would demand even more of his courage, intelligence, and determination. And with that thought, he prepared for the next challenge with the same firm resolve that had guided him so far. The seas around Crete were as blue as the sky that covered them, but the beauty of that landscape hid a threat that the island's inhabitants knew all too well: the Bull of Crete. This creature, sent by Poseidon, ravaged the land with its uncontrollable fury. Hercules, commissioned by Eurystheus to capture the bull, knew that this task would lead him to confront not only a wild animal, but the very will of the gods. On landing in Crete, Hercules was greeted by King Minos, who wore a mixture of relief and apprehension on his face. The bull, which should have been sacrificed to Poseidon, had been spared by Minos, a decision that had angered the god of the sea, leading him to curse the creature. Now the bull was a living symbol of divine wrath, and capturing it would require not only strength, but also the favor of the gods, something Hercules could never take for granted. Minos, with a solemn gesture, gave Hercules the necessary permission, and the hero set off in search of the creature. He made his way across the island's devastated fields, following the trails of destruction left by the bull. When he finally caught sight of the beast, it was more imposing than any account could describe. Its eyes glowed with an unquenchable rage, and its muscular body radiated a strength that seemed to defy Hercules himself. The bull charged at him with a speed that belied its size, its hooves resounding like thunder over the dry ground. Hercules dodged at the last moment, feeling the air cut off by the onslaught. He knew that the creature could not be defeated by normal means. There was no way to tame it simply by using brute force. So, with the patience he had learned throughout his adventures, Hercules began to study the bull's movements, anticipating its attacks and dodging each one. After a long and exhausting chase, Hercules finally found his opening. In one agile movement, he leapt onto the beast's back, grabbing it by the horns with all the strength in his arms. The bull fought ferociously, shaking its head from side to side, trying to bring down the hero, who was now clinging to him with the tenacity of a sailor facing a storm. Hercules, using all his strength, managed to subdue the bull. His physical power, combined with his unwavering determination, finally won out. With the bull under control, Hercules led it back to Mycenae. The return journey was long, but this time the bull didn't resist. It seemed that even the wildest and most powerful creature recognized the superior force that was now guiding it. On arriving at the gates of Mycenae, the sight of Hercules bringing the bull caused panic among the inhabitants. Eurystheus, as always, was terrified and ordered the bull to be taken away from the city immediately. Hercules, without arguing, released the creature, which disappeared into the plains, where it would later be found and killed by another great hero, Theseus. This task, like the previous ones, did not bring Hercules the satisfaction of a simple job completed. Instead, he felt the weight of the choices that the gods imposed on mortals. The bull was both a victim and a villain, shaped by divine wills. And once again, Hercules realized that his journey was not just a series of physical challenges, but a path of understanding and ultimately compassion for those who, like him, were pawns in the great game of the gods. With this achievement, Hercules prepared himself for the next task. Each challenge shaped him, not only in strength, but also in wisdom, a wisdom that he knew was essential to achieving his longed-for redemption. The barren fields of Thrace were vast and desolate, but Hercules advanced without hesitation, knowing that the next task ahead of him was perhaps one of the darkest. The horses of Diomedes, creatures known for their veracity and strength, were fed human flesh by the cruel king Diomedes. This mission, unlike the previous ones, not only involved capturing the creatures, but also dealing with Diomedes himself, a tyrant who ruled his land with an iron fist. Hercules arrived at Diomedes' fortress under the cover of night, peering into the shadows and assessing the terrain. He knew that brute force would not be enough against such an unpredictable opponent and his terrible horses. The decision to attack at night was no accident. Hercules knew that darkness could be his ally against Diomedes' beasts. As he entered the stable where the horses were kept, Hercules smelled the pungent scent of blood and death in the air. The horses' eyes glowed in the darkness like coals, reflecting the insatiable hunger that dominated them. Hercules knew he couldn't tame them easily, so in one swift movement, he grabbed the chains that held them and pulled with all his might, ripping them from their tethers. The horses reacted violently, but Hercules, with his extraordinary strength, kept them under control. He led them out of the stable, intending to flee with them before Diomedes' guards realized his presence. However, Diomedes, ever vigilant, quickly learned of the invasion and, enraged, organized his men to pursue Hercules. The chase was fierce, with Diomedes leading his soldiers through the dark hills of Thrace. When they caught up with Hercules, a confrontation was inevitable. Hercules, knowing that he couldn't concentrate on fighting the men and controlling the horses at the same time, made a decision that would shape the fate of that battle. In a daring maneuver, Hercules released the horses and led them towards Diomedes. The horses, mad with hunger, immediately recognized their master and attacked him with relentless fury. The cruel king had no time to react. He was knocked down and devoured by the very horses he loved so much. His soldiers, terrified by the horrible scene, fled in panic, leaving Hercules alone with the now satiated and tame creatures. Watching the scene, Hercules felt a mixture of triumph and disgust. He hadn't planned this outcome, but he recognized the poetic justice in Diomedes' death. The creatures, now tamed to satiety, were taken by Hercules to Mycenae, where Eurystheus, ever anxious, ordered the horses to be released and sent away, fearing their wildness. The horses, without their master to guide and feed them, were eventually captured by larger forces and consecrated to Hera. But their legacy of terror was finally ended. Hercules, for his part, left Thrace with a guilty conscience, aware that not all his victories were without shadows. This task taught Hercules a hard lesson about the nature of cruelty and how power corrupts those who hold it. Diomedes had been destroyed by his own creations, and Hercules couldn't help but wonder about the fine line that separates heroes from monsters. He knew that his own path was littered with difficult choices, and that every victory brought with it a cost, often invisible at first glance, but always present in his soul. With these thoughts weighing heavily on his mind, Hercules set off to tackle the next task, aware that each step would take him closer to the redemption he so desperately sought, but also to a deeper understanding of the nature of the power, sacrifice, and responsibility he bore as the greatest of Greek heroes. The waters of the Black Sea stretched out like a vast blue tapestry before Hercules as he headed for his next challenge. The destination was the distant land of the Amazons, a nation of formidable warriors, where Hippolyta, the most powerful among them, reigned. His mission was to recover the belt of Hippolyta, a symbol of authority and power, which had been granted to him by Ares, the god of war. But the task was delicate. It wasn't just a question of strength, but also of diplomacy and, perhaps, betrayal. On landing on the shores of the land of the Amazons, Hercules wasted no time in showing his intentions. He presented himself to Hippolyta with the respect due to a queen and a warrior. Hippolyta, for her part, was not insensitive to the hero's fame. She welcomed him without hostility, recognizing the greatness of his deeds and the courage that had led him there. The two figures, so different but equally imposing, met not as enemies, but as equals. Hercules explained his mission, asking for the belt as part of the tasks imposed on him. Hippolyta, impressed by Hercules' honesty and perhaps touched by his struggle for redemption, agreed to give up the belt without the need for conflict. It was a peaceful and dignified solution, which reflected the mutual respect that had formed between the two. But while Hercules and Apollo were talking, the storm was brewing in another corner of Olympus. Hera, always Hercules' adversary, could not allow this task to be completed so easily. Jealous and vengeful, she descended into the realm of the Amazons disguised as one of the warriors and sowed the seeds of doubt among them. With cunning words, Hera convinced the Amazons that Hercules had come to kidnap their queen and destroy their kingdom. What began as diplomacy quickly turned into chaos. The Amazons, in a frenzy of protection, surrounded Hercules and Hippolyta, their spears and swords glinting in the sunlight. The misunderstanding had become an unavoidable confrontation, and Hippolyta, betrayed by her own people, had no choice but to defend herself alongside Hercules. The battle that followed was fierce. Hercules fought with the strength of 1,000 men, but with a heavy heart, for he knew that such violence was not necessary. The Amazons, driven by fear and misinformation, attacked with everything they had. In the heat of combat, the noble Hippolyta, who was trying to restore peace, was killed by one of her own warriors. When the chaos finally subsided, the earth was stained with the blood of many warriors, and at the center of it all lay the lifeless body of Hippolyta. Hercules, shaken by the tragedy, picked up the belt, as was his mission, but the weight of the object in his hand seemed infinitely heavier than the gold it was made of. He knew that this victory was not one that could be celebrated. The belt had been conquered, but at a terrible cost. The fragile alliance between Hercules and the Amazons had been destroyed by divine interference. And once again, the hero found himself reflecting on the fine line that separated the gods from mortals, a line that the gods seemed to cross with ease, without regard for the consequences. With the belt in his possession, Hercules left the land of the Amazons. He didn't look back, but the weight of Hippolyta's death followed him every step of the way. The mission had been accomplished, but the price was too high to ignore. Once again, Hercules saw himself as a piece in a much bigger game, a game where the morality of the gods was at odds with human values. As he prepared for his next task, Hercules knew he was changing. Each completed mission brought more than trophies or glory. It brought bitter lessons, painful memories, and a growing realization that the redemption he sought might never be found in simple victories or achievements, but in how he dealt with the weight of his own actions and the tragedies that inevitably accompanied them. The winds of the vast western plains blew with relentless force, carrying with them the smell of distant seas and the echo of ancient stories. Hercules was heading towards the far west, where the limits of the known world were confused with legends and myths. His destination was the island of Erythea, home to Geryon, the three-bodied giant who guarded a herd of sacred cattle. Eurystheus, always on the lookout for impossible challenges, had ordered Hercules to capture this herd, yet another task that seemed destined to test not only his strength, but also his endurance and determination. The journey to Erythea was long and full of dangers. Hercules sailed the seas with the help of the golden cup of Helios himself, the sun god, who, recognizing the nobility of his mission, granted him the use of this divine vessel. The cup floated on the water, illuminated by the glow of the sun, carrying Hercules through rough seas until, finally, the distant shores of the island appeared on the horizon. When he disembarked, Hercules wasted no time. He knew that Geryon and his flock would be protected by formidable guardians. The first obstacle he encountered was Ortro, the terrible two-headed dog who guarded the entrance to the pastures where the cattle grazed. Ortro, with his flaming eyes and razor-sharp teeth, advanced on Hercules with a fury that seemed to come from the depths of Hades itself. But Hercules, with the same dexterity he had used against the previous beasts, confronted the creature, crushing it with a powerful blow from his club. Ortro fell to the ground, defeated, and the way to the herd was open. The next to face Hercules was Eurytion, the shepherd who looked after Geryon's animals. Although human, Eurytion was an experienced warrior, loyal to his giant master. He challenged Hercules, but his bravery was no match for the hero's strength. Hercules defeated the shepherd with a single blow, leaving the flock unprotected. But the real challenge was yet to come. Geryon, the giant with 3 bodies and uncommon strength, appeared from the horizon, his imposing presence casting a shadow over the land. Each of his bodies moved independently, his arms raising 3 deadly spears towards Hercules. The giant shouted a challenge that resounded throughout the island, but Hercules, determined as ever, didn't back down. The battle that followed was one of the toughest Hercules had ever faced. Geryon attacked with the fury of 3 warriors, his spears cutting through the air with terrifying speed. But Hercules, moving with the agility of a warrior who knew every combat technique, dodged the attacks, and with a strength that surpassed even Geryon's, launched a poisoned arrow, bathed in the Hydra's blood, straight into the giant's heart. Geryon let out a cry that made the mountains tremble, and he fell to the ground, his 3 bodies crumbling like a fortress that was finally succumbing to the weight of its own greatness. Hercules, exhausted but victorious, looked at the herd that was now free to be led away. Gathering up the sacred cows, Hercules led them back to the golden bowl of Helios and began the long journey back to Mycenae. The seas that had brought him to Erythea now brought him back, but he knew that although the sea was calm, the waters he crossed symbolized the waves of challenges that would continue to test his strength and his soul. On arriving in Mycenae, Hercules handed the herd over to Eurystheus, who once again hid in his cowardly safety, afraid to even look at the animals that had been guarded by such a powerful giant. For Hercules, the task was accomplished, but the cost was beginning to weigh on him in a way that the glories of victory could not alleviate. He felt that each mission he completed took him a little further away from the world of ordinary men, placing him in a sphere where the divine and the mortal were in eternal conflict. Geryon, with his 3 bodies, represented not only a physical enemy, but also the multiple aspects of life that Hercules was beginning to understand. Strength, challenge, and perhaps most painful of all, the loneliness of someone living between 2 worlds. Even so, Hercules knew that his path was not complete. There were more tasks awaiting him, and with them, more lessons that he would have to learn, often at a cost that only he could understand. And so, with the shadow of Erytheia's island still in his mind, he prepared himself for the next challenge, aware that each victory was just one step on a journey far longer and more complex than he had ever imagined. The sky above Mount Atlas was tinged with the golds and reds of dusk, reflecting the majesty and grandeur of the ancient world. Hercules, his body tired and his mind heavy, was now heading for the Garden of the Hesperides, the legendary orchard guarded by the nymph daughters of Atlas, where the golden apples grew, a wedding gift given by Gaia to Hera. These apples were more than just fruit. They symbolized immortality and the favor of the gods, making them one of the most coveted prizes in the mythological world. For Hercules, this task was unlike any other he had faced. The apples were not protected by monsters or beasts, but by much more subtle and dangerous forces, time itself and the divine will. He knew that the garden was a sacred place, where not even the gods dared venture without good reason. Finding the place was a challenge in itself, for the garden was surrounded by mysteries and secrets that few could unravel. Hercules sought advice and direction, and was led to the Titan Prometheus, the benefactor of mankind, who was still chained to a rock, suffering the eternal torment of having his liver devoured daily by an eagle. Hercules, moved by a compassion that grew within him with every challenge he faced, decided to free Prometheus by killing the eagle with one of his arrows. In return, Prometheus revealed to Hercules the secret to reaching the apples. He had to seek out the Titan Atlas, who held the sky on his shoulders. Arriving at the foot of Mount Atlas, Hercules met the Titan, whose arched back and tense muscles supported the weight of the firmament. The sight was both grand and painful, and Hercules, in all humility, made his proposal. He offered Atlas a brief respite from his burden. He would hold the sky in his place, while Atlas went to the garden to fetch the apples for him. Atlas, eager to be free, even for a moment, accepted without hesitation. With the weight of the sky now on his shoulders, Hercules felt immeasurable pressure. It was more than a test of physical strength. It was a test of his endurance and determination. As the world spun above him, Hercules stood firm, his feet digging into the earth like the roots of an unshakable tree. Every second seemed like an eternity, but Hercules didn't falter. When Atlas returned with the apples in his hands, he smiled mischievously. Freedom, however temporary, was a gift he was reluctant to give up. He suggested that he himself take the apples to Eurystheus, relieving Hercules of yet another task. But the hero, sensing the maneuver, used his cunning. He agreed, but asked Atlas to hold up the sky for a brief moment, just long enough for Hercules to adjust the position of his cloak to better support the weight. Atlas, naive in his excitement, took back the sky, relieving Hercules of his burden. In one swift, decisive movement, Hercules picked up the apples and set off, leaving Atlas stranded at his destination, as he had always been. With the golden apples in hand, Hercules began his return to Mycenae. The task, which had required more than mere strength or courage, was accomplished, but not without leaving its mark on his soul. He had faced the temptation to cheat, the insidiousness of momentary freedom, and the idea of responsibility in a way he had never imagined before. When he handed the apples over to Eurystheus, who, as always, was amazed and frightened by the power of the divine artifacts, Hercules knew that his mission was drawing to a close, but his heart was heavier than ever. The apples were returned to Athena, who placed them back in the Garden of the Hesperides, restoring divine order. Hercules, however, felt that something had changed inside him. The line between what was right and what was necessary became more and more blurred in his mind, and he understood that true redemption would come not just from fulfilling tasks, but from a deep understanding of his own nature and the choices he made. With this new perception, he prepared himself for the last and most fearsome task, aware that everything he had learned so far would culminate in the final confrontation with the fate the gods had in store for him. The shadows of the underworld seemed to swallow up the light as Hercules approached the gates of Hades, where his last and most dreaded task awaited him: to capture Cerberus, the three-headed watchdog guardian of the realm of the dead. Cerberus was not just a monster, but an embodiment of terror itself, a creature whose duty it was to prevent souls from escaping Hades' domain and the living from daring to enter. No mortal had ever returned from the underworld, except for a few favored by the gods, and now Hercules was about to challenge this final frontier between life and death. The journey to the underworld was solemn and introspective. Hercules, with the help of Hermes, the messenger of the gods, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, descended into the realms of Hades. The crossing of the river Styx was marked by a sepulchral silence, where the black waters reflected the shadows of lost souls. Charon, the empty-eyed boatman, rowed with rhythmic, mechanical movements, taking Hercules across that sea of tormented souls. On reaching the gate to the underworld, Hercules was greeted by Persephone, the queen of the dead, whose ethereal beauty seemed to contrast with the darkness around her. Hades, with his impassive countenance and eyes that glowed like burning coals, appeared beside his wife. Hercules knew that, although he was the son of Zeus, he could not demand the cooperation of the Lord of the underworld. He would have to negotiate. Hades, aware of Hercules' exploits, offered him a challenge. He could take Cerberus to the world of the living, but only if he managed to overpower him without the use of weapons. It was a condition that would test the essence of Hercules' strength, not only his physical power, but also his courage and control over himself. Cerberus appeared before Hercules, his three heads snarling and his eyes burning with a rage that only death can know. Hercules felt the suffocating heat of the monster's breath and the crushing weight of its presence. But he didn't retreat. Instead, he approached slowly, each movement calculated, his mind focused on the monumental task ahead. With a strength that surpassed mere musculature, Hercules grabbed one of Cerberus' heads with one hand, while his other hands controlled the other two. The dog fought with infernal fury, its jaws snapping, trying to bite, to tear, to destroy. Hercules felt the monster's crushing weight in his arms, but his determination was greater. He clenched his teeth and, with a primal scream, overpowered the creature, forcing it to submit to his will. Hades watched, his expression unchanged, but with a slight approval in his dark eyes. Persephone, silent, bowed her head in recognition of the feat Hercules, with Cerberus subdued, thanked Hades for allowing him to lead the guardian out of the underworld. As he emerged from the gates of the underworld, carrying Cerberus, Hercules felt the weight of the world of the dead recede. He knew he had crossed a line that few, if any, had crossed before. He had faced primordial fear and emerged victorious, but not without a new understanding of mortality and the implacable power of the gods. When he arrived in Mycenae, the sight of Hercules bringing back Cerberus terrified Eurystheus more than anything else the hero had done. The king, pale and trembling, begged Hercules to return the monster to the underworld as quickly as possible. Hercules, without hesitation, did just that, freeing Cerberus to return to his post as guardian of the dead. With the final task completed, Hercules felt not the euphoria of victory, but a deep weariness. He had accomplished all 12 tasks set before him, facing not only physical creatures and challenges, but also the limits of his own humanity. He had learned that true strength came not just from his muscles, but from his ability to overcome fear, doubt, and suffering. Now, with the 12 tasks completed, Hercules knew that his path to redemption was complete. However, the journey had changed him irrevocably. He was no longer the same man who had begun this odyssey. He was wiser, more humble, and, paradoxically, more aware of his own fragility. He had proved to himself and to the gods that he was worthy, but he had also learned that true heroism was not simply about grandiose conquests, but about facing and accepting the harsh truths of existence. And so Hercules, the greatest of heroes, moved on, knowing that, despite all his victories, his true journey had only just begun. A journey in search of inner peace and understanding in a world where gods and men coexisted, often in conflict, but also in search of meaning.